University.
And I'm Jacob Rawlins. I'm also a professor at Brigham Young University.
We put together this book from a conference that we held in Park City in 2017, where we brought together scholars from all over the world who had a lot of interesting insights. This is our book. It's the third in the series by Multilingual Matters, and I think it's a great contribution to the series as well. I also like the color, and then the design. I hope it captures what we have in the book. I mean, when you look at it, you see all these little points scattered everywhere, but you also see some convergence as well. And I think that captures what we were saying in the book, that the values lead to different approaches, different ways of seeing prescriptivism all over the world. But at the same time, there's some commonalities that make it a fruitful field to study. And I think that's what we've captured in this book.
What I really liked about putting this volume together was we took these papers from the conference that were already very good, but really turned them into some groundbreaking publications where we explore things that haven't been explored before in prescriptivism.
Oh, there's some papers there that you'll never see anywhere else. One of my favorites is from Loretta Weisklavskiani, who talks about prescriptivism in Lithuania, and whatever we think we know about prescriptivism based on our experience with the Anglophone tradition, you have to throw out the window when you're looking at Lithuania, because there she shows that it's the linguists who are the prime movers in prescriptive practice. In fact, they'll have these contests where the school children will say why a particular linguist is their hero, because that linguist is protecting Lithuanian from the sources of decay. It's just really hard to get your mind around that flip that's going on in Lithuania.
I never thought I'd see a place where a linguist was a child's hero. But, one of my favorite papers was Kate Burridge examining the Mennonite people in Canada, who, again, they go against kind of prescriptivist tradition, where they're using a combination of different kinds of German and English, and they have no concept in their language for correctness. So there's not a good or bad attached to different forms of the language.
Yeah, I thought that in every society there would be notions of correctness, but this is a society whose religious values override that, and they just won't judge people's language. And then you have some other papers that don't have so much a new approach. A new approach, but they have a new methods that they're trying out. And one of my favorites was Victoria Kostadinova on the split infinitive. In it, she's going over some territory you might expect, but then she starts showing that the split infinitive happens to occur with other things that are on the proscribed list. And so that gives us a new way of looking at what standard English is. Not only would it be the language of people or situations, but it also might be the kinds of things that are going with it. And I think we have an intuitive notion of that, but she makes it explicit with a fairly rigorous method. I think you find that method worth looking at, if nothing else, in a paper. The paper has plenty else.
I think that we had some great approaches in this volume. One of my other ones that I really enjoyed was Carmen Ebner's paper, where she talks about linguistic identities attached to different forms of the language, and how British and American usage, we don't just attach meaning to different words, we attach value connected to our national identity.
Well, yeah, she was dealing with Britain versus the U.S. And then you get that other paper from Severin and Burridge that's throwing in Australia, somewhere in between. That's a lot of fun. Another approach that I really quite liked, one of those times where you say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way before. Lisa Lotta Underwald was showing, well, she brings up the idea that just as we knew that prescriptivism was in registering standard English, maybe it's also in registering non-standard English. Our notion of non-standard depends on this definition of standard, and our notion of vernacular becomes enregistered by that. It's a new approach, and she introduces it in this volume, and I'm waiting to see what she does more with it. It's pretty exciting, actually.
One of the other areas that this volume is innovative is that it addresses editing as a field, which has always been used as kind of an expression of prescriptivism. But the papers in this volume do a serious dig into editing and its place in the conversation of descriptivism and prescriptivism. One, for example, by Linda Pilier, is comparing British copy editors versus American copy editors and looking at what they do with the same text and digging into why their approaches differ and how it reflects a greater attitude towards the language.
And then the other paper by Jonathan Owen looked at the editing empirically, and it just grabbed some text that had been edited and cataloged those edits. And both papers showed us that editors are not monolithic the way we need to talk about them when we're talking about prescriptivism. They actually vary in their choices as well. So that's worth pointing out, even though once it's pointed out, you say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But we'd always treated editors as a monolithic force when we talked about prescriptivism before. So these are welcome papers. Then there are a bunch of papers that just have these treats in them. We may have seen the angle before, we may have seen the issue before, but there are just these new insights that just grab you. And of course, John Joseph, anything that he writes is worth reading. And as is his paper in here, and if you've never read anything by John Joseph, you need to read something. And you might as well read the paper that we have in here. It's a great paper.
There's also a fantastic, I'm going to embarrass you here for a minute, a wonderful paper by Tom Chapman here that is kind of defining the field and defining where the conversation about prescriptivism and descriptivism needs to go over the next 10, 15, 20 years as we look at how we define each other and how the terms that we've used have been assigned value to them, but how those terms are not as useful as they should be. So.
Yeah, and I can't leave out Marla Perkins. She was doing the most descriptive of all activities, and that was documenting in endangered language. And in doing that, she said, wait a minute, I'm making prescriptive judgments and moves here. So she worked out in her paper just what is the difference between descriptivism and prescriptivism, and she wasn't really sure, as none of us are when it comes down to it by the time we get done with this book. So it's a fun book to edit because there's just so many insights scattered throughout all the papers. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I'm a bit biased because I edited it, but I have enjoyed reading the papers again after it's been published. I think it would be a valuable book for scholars in the field or graduate students who are interested in language and